It was close to midnight when the world of a billionaire collided with the shadows of a forgotten street. One wrong turn, one faint whisper, "Sir, please don't call the police." And everything Asher Whitman thought he knew about his perfect, predictable life began to unravel. Stay with this story because what that young billionaire discovered in the dark will challenge everything you believe about luck, family, and fate. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if the person you tried to help turned out to be part of your past? The night air over Boston was sharp and bitter, the kind that cut through even the finest wool coat. Asher's driver waited down the block, but he walked instead, too restless to sit still after another victory dinner filled with empty laughter and hollow toasts. At 34, he was already one of the youngest tech billionaires in the country, a man who could buy anything except sleep. The city glittered beneath him like a circuit board, bright, cold, efficient. He was halfway down Beacon Street when he caught the sound again, softer than the hum of traffic, almost a breath. "Sir, please don't call the police." He stopped. The voice came from an alley between two brownstones, half swallowed by darkness. His instincts told him to keep walking, but something curiosity, conscience, maybe loneliness, pulled him in. He took a few careful steps forward and saw her. A little girl, maybe 6, huddled behind a recycling bin. Her knees were pulled tight against her chest. Her jeans ripped her thin jacket, zipped to her chin. She clutched a worn messenger bag as if it held her entire life. When the wind lifted her hair, he saw her face small, dirt-smudged, but startlingly calm, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Asher raised his hands, trying not to frighten her. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'm not calling anyone." The girl didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes followed him like a cornered animal's. He took off his scarf and knelt, placing it on the ground between them. "It's freezing. You can have this." No response. He straightened, exhaled, and said, "I'll get you something hot to eat. If you're gone when I come back, that's fine." Then he left. 10 minutes later, he was back with a takeout bag from a nearby deli. The smell of clam chowder filled the alley as he placed it near her feet. "Here," he murmured. The girl hesitated before leaning forward, drawn by the heat and the scent. She dipped the spoon cautiously, then devoured it like she hadn't eaten in days. Asher stood a few steps away, watching the steam rise around her face, and something inside him cracked open. He'd seen numbers collapse, companies fail, and markets burn, but he'd never seen hunger this small, this human. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked up, eyes wide but guarded. "Nora," she said finally. "Nice to meet you, Nora. I'm Asher." She gave a tiny nod, clutching her spoon. That was when he noticed the pendant around her neck, a small silver compass, old and scratched, turning gently against her chest. "That's a nice necklace," he said softly. "It helps me find home," she replied. Before he could say another word, a woman's voice cut through the night. "Nora." From the far end of the alley, an older woman approached, bundled in too many layers. Her steps were quick, protective. "Step away from her," she warned Asher. "It's okay," he said calmly. "I just brought her soup." The woman's gaze softened slightly. "I'm Evelyn," she said after a moment. "We look out for her. She's got nowhere else." A tall man with a limp appeared behind her, nodding in a quiet greeting. "Hank," he said simply. Asher studied them, two people who had clearly known hard lives but still shielded this child with fierce loyalty. "You all shouldn't be out here in this cold," he said. "I can get you a motel for the night." Evelyn shook her head. "No names, no addresses, just food and heat, that's enough." Asher didn't argue. He just nodded and handed over a bag of glove socks and heat packs he'd picked up on his way back. Evelyn's eyes flickered with something between gratitude and disbelief. "You're a strange man, Mr. Whitman," she said. "Most people don't even look at us." Maybe I should have looked sooner, he replied quietly. The wind picked up scattering papers down the alley. Nora tucked the compass inside her jacket as if to keep it warm. Asher watched her trace a finger over it, the chain glinting in the weak light. "Who gave that to you?" he asked. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "It was already mine," she said. "It's got my letters." She slipped it off and handed it to him without warning. On the back, half buried beneath grime, were two faint initials, A.W. His breath caught. Those were his initials engraved in the same looping script his sister had used when she gifted him a matching compass years ago before the accident, before their family fell apart. He turned it over in disbelief, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Where did you get this, Nora?" he asked. She frowned. "I told you. It was already mine." Then, almost as if to herself, she began to hum a tune, soft, familiar, heartbreakingly so. It was a lullaby his sister used to sing when he couldn't sleep as a boy. Asher stood frozen, staring at this child who shouldn't know that melody, wearing an object that shouldn't exist outside his past. For a long moment the cold disappeared. The city vanished, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A shiver that wasn't from the weather, but from the strange sense that life had just handed him back a piece of a puzzle he didn't know was still missing. He didn't understand it yet. He only knew one thing for certain: this was no coincidence. He looked down the alley once more at the girl with the compass and the song, and realized his carefully built world of numbers and logic had just cracked wide open. What began as a simple act of kindness was about to turn into the most personal mystery of his life. The next morning, Boston woke under a pale sun that turned the rooftops gold and the air sharp enough to sting. Asher Whitman hadn't slept much. He couldn't stop seeing that little girl's face, the wary eyes, the trembling hands clutching the silver compass with his initials. It shouldn't mean anything, yet it did. It sat in his chest like a question that refused to fade. When dawn hit his penthouse windows, he pushed away the untouched coffee, grabbed his coat, and went back to Beacon Street. The alley was empty, swept clean by the city's early risers. Only a few footprints remained in the frost. For a man who built his fortune on data and precision, it felt ridiculous chasing ghosts in daylight. But that night hadn't been a dream. He found the same deli, ordered more chowder, and left a note tucked into the bag for Nora from the man who hates cold nights. Then he waited. He waited every night after that. By the end of the week, she came back. Evelyn spotted him first and sighed. "You're persistent," she said, her voice part suspicion, part reluctant respect. "I've been called?" "Worse," Asher answered. She studied him for a moment before motioning him closer. Nora was crouched near the grate, sketching on the back of an old newspaper with a pencil stub. "You draw?" he asked. She nodded, not looking up. "Maps." She pointed at the lines, crooked streets, dotted circles, arrows, places we stay, places we don't. Evelyn smiled faintly. "The kid's got a memory like a compass. Every street corner is in her head." Asher knelt beside her, careful not to crowd. "I've got paper," he said, "real paper, and colored pencils if you want them." Nora looked up, doubtful. "They'll just get stolen." He hesitated, then smiled. "Then I'll keep extras." That earned the smallest flicker of a grin. Over the next few weeks, he began to visit the South End soup kitchen Evelyn worked at. He didn't tell anyone who he was. To the volunteers, he was just Ash, the quiet guy, who rolled up his sleeves and washed trays until his hands reddened. Evelyn caught him once, scrubbing a pot like a man trying to erase a lifetime of guilt. "You could write a check," she said. "It would fix our heating in a day." He shrugged. "I've written enough checks in my life. This feels better." She didn't argue after that. Nora warmed to him slowly like a stray, testing the idea of trust. She began asking questions what his favorite food was, if he'd ever slept outside, why he always wore the same gray coat. He told her the truth, because it keeps me grounded. She accepted that answer without pressing further, as children do when they sense pain behind an adult's words. One Saturday, he brought something new, a prepaid phone and a library card in Nora's name. It's not much, he explained to Evelyn, but if anything happens, she can call me. And maybe she'll like books as much as maps. Evelyn turned the card in her hands. "You're making it hard not to trust you," she said. He smiled. "That's the idea." Still, he couldn't shake the unease about the compass. It lived in the back of his mind like a riddle. Some nights, he caught himself staring at the ceiling, replaying the melody she had hummed, trying to convince himself it was coincidence. But coincidence didn't hum the same tune his sister used to calm his nerves before every product launch. Coincidence didn't etch his initials into metal. Something connected them, he was sure. Then, one afternoon, while helping Nora draw in a borrowed classroom at the shelter, he noticed the sleeve of her jacket slip down her shoulder. For a moment, he saw a faint crescent-shaped birthmark near her collarbone. He froze. It was identical to the one his sister had, the one she used to joke about calling their family's good luck charm. His stomach knotted. He forced his voice steady. "That's a cool mark," he said. "Does it hurt?" Nora shook her head, oblivious to his shock. "It's always been there. Like a moon." He nodded, pretending not to care, but inside he was already unraveling. Back at his office, the walls of glass felt colder than ever. His assistant handed him the day's agenda: conference calls, contract reviews, and investor dinner, but none of it mattered. He was thinking about a 6-year-old girl drawing maps of alleys, wearing his initials around her neck, carrying a mark his sister once traced with her fingertip. Could she be family? The idea was absurd, impossible. And yet his instincts, honed by years of reading, people whispered otherwise. That evening, Evelyn and Hank joined him at the soup kitchen's back entrance. "We need to talk," Hank said, leaning on his cane. Nora found something. He handed Asher a scrap of old fabric, a torn corner of a baby blanket with a faded letter stitched into it. "N." Asher's breath caught. Evelyn explained softly. She said she's had it since before she could remember. Found it with the compass. "Where did it come from?" Asher asked. Hank shrugged. "We found her behind a church on Tremont 6 years ago. No note, no record. Just that blanket and the pendant." She was barely walking. The words sank deep, heavy with meaning. 6 years. That was exactly how long his sister had been gone. Asher pressed his palm against the rough wall behind him, trying to steady the wave of memory. The car accident, the funeral, the unanswered questions about the baby she'd never brought home. He had spent years believing she'd miscarried. No one had ever confirmed it. What if he didn't finish the thought? Instead, he crouched down to Nora's level when she appeared at the door, holding a new drawing, a crooked house with no pictures on the walls. "That's your place?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Evelyn says homes have pictures, but ours doesn't yet." Her words hit him harder than he expected. "Maybe you just haven't taken them yet," he said softly. When he dropped her off that night, the wind was rising again, carrying salt from the harbor. Evelyn thanked him for another bag of groceries and warned, "Whatever you're looking for, be careful. That child's been through enough surprises." Asher nodded. He knew she was right, but some questions don't wait for permission to be asked. Driving home, he stared out at the glittering skyline that used to mean success. Now, it looked like 1,000 cold windows staring back. Somewhere below that light, a little girl with a moon-shaped birthmark and a compass that bore his initials was sketching a house with no pictures, waiting for someone to help her fill in the walls. The first snow of December came early that year, dusting Boston in silence. Asher Whitman stood by his office window, coffee gone cold in his hand, staring out at the white haze spreading across the city. 6 years ago, snow like this had blanketed the morning his sister's car disappeared off the highway. He hadn't thought about that day in years, but now it played on a loop in his mind because of a little girl who drew maps and wore a compass with his initials. He couldn't shake the feeling that fate had drawn him into something more than coincidence. Every logical part of him screamed to leave it alone, to accept that helping Nora was just an act of kindness. But logic had stopped working the moment he saw that crescent birthmark and the way she hummed that old lullaby. If there was even a chance she was connected to his sister, he had to know. Yet the idea of secretly testing her DNA without permission made his stomach turn. He'd seen enough of the world's arrogance. He refused to become another man who used power to take without asking. He called Evelyn one morning and asked to meet at the soup kitchen. They sat across from each other, the clang of dishes and hum of chatter filling the air. "I need to ask you something," he began carefully. "It's about Nora." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. "She's safe. Don't worry. It's not that," he said. I think she might be family." He told her everything: his sister's death, the missing baby, the compass, the birthmark. When he finished, Evelyn didn't speak right away. She looked at him with the wary compassion of someone who'd seen too many false hopes. "You think she's your niece," she said finally. "I don't know what I think," Asher admitted. "But I need to find out. And I can't do that without your permission." Evelyn rubbed her temples. "You'd do a DNA test only if you agree," he said. "No labs without your consent. I'll pay for it, handle it privately, and she never has to know unless we're sure." She studied him for a long moment. "You really care about her, don't you?" "More than I should," he said quietly. "But not enough to hurt her." Evelyn sighed, her voice softening. "All right, we'll do it if it helps you both sleep." 2 days later, they went to a discreet clinic off Tremont Street. Nora thought it was just a regular checkup. Evelyn sat beside her, holding her hand, while the nurse swabbed the inside of her cheek. "See? Easy," Evelyn said, smiling through the tension. Asher signed the papers, his hand shaking as he wrote his name. The doctor promised results within 48 hours. Asher didn't sleep once during those 2 nights. At Harbor Light's headquarters, his staff noticed his distraction. During meetings, his mind wandered. His board grew restless. One of his executives pulled him aside. "You've missed 2 investor calls. People are starting to talk." Asher stared at the glowing conference screen. "Let them talk," he said flatly. "They've got no idea what's important." He spent the second night pacing his penthouse, the city below, blurred by snow. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. The call was from the doctor. Asher's throat tightened. "Mr. Whitman," the voice said, calm and clinical. "We have the preliminary results." He gripped the edge of his desk, and there was a pause long enough to stop his heart. "The match is conclusive," the doctor said. "Nora Ruiz is your biological niece." The words hit like thunder. Asher's knees nearly gave out. For a moment, the silence in his apartment felt deafening. He sank into his chair, staring at the skyline, every light blurring into tears. His sister's child alive, safe right here in the same city all this time. All the years of searching the guilt, the unanswered questions, it all came rushing back at once. He whispered into the empty room, "I found you." He met Evelyn the next morning at a coffee shop in Back Bay, hands trembling as he pushed the folder across the table. She didn't need to open it. She saw the truth in his face. "You were right," she said softly. "She's yours." He nodded, barely able to speak. "My sister didn't die alone," he murmured. "Her daughter's alive because of you." Evelyn blinked hard, her voice breaking. "We just kept her safe. That's all." Later that day, Asher picked Nora up from the shelter for their usual afternoon walk. He didn't tell her yet he wasn't ready, and neither was she. Instead, they stopped by the park where snow covered the swings like powdered sugar. Nora kicked at the snow, giggling when it stuck to her boots. "You're quiet today," she said. "I'm thinking," he replied. "About what?" "About promises," he said, "the ones we make and the ones we break." She tilted her head. "You break promises once," he said. "But I'm going to fix it." That night, after dropping her off, Asher sat in his car for nearly an hour, watching the apartment window glow softly through the frost. He thought about what came next. He couldn't just show up one day and tell her she belonged to a world of wealth and legacy. She'd grown up loved even without luxury. Evelyn and Hank were her real family too. He owed them the respect of time, patience, and honesty. When he finally drove home, he opened the small wooden box that held his sister's belongings. Inside was a photograph his sister smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket with a stitched letter N. He hadn't looked at it in years. Now, he pressed his thumb against the image and whispered, "I found her, Anna. I found your little girl." He thought that was the end of the mystery. He didn't yet know that behind his sister's death was a deeper betrayal, that someone in his own circle had wanted that child to disappear. For now, all he knew was that proof had come at a price, and promises broken long ago were demanding to be kept. The storm rolled in before dusk, slanting rain against the tall glass walls of Harbor Light Systems. Inside, Asher Whitman stood at the edge of the boardroom, his reflection fractured in the windows like a man split in two. The CEO the world knew, and the brother who'd just found the niece he never knew existed. For the first time in years, his priorities weren't lining up neatly in a quarterly report. He'd made a promise to his sister long ago to protect what she loved most. Now, that promise had a name, Nora. But something about her story still didn't fit. How had a baby vanished from a hospital and ended up behind a church with a compass from his family? How did no one notice every road he followed ended at the same wall, the car crash file, the missing medical records, and one locked folder labeled Restricted Access Harbor Light Internal Security? That folder carried a date 6 years back, the week of his sister's death. He called his chief of operations, Nathan Cross, an old colleague who had joined the company the same year his sister vanished. Nate Asher said, trying to sound casual, "Do you remember who handled security audits in 2019? "Sure," Nathan replied. "That was outsourced to Rhodes Consulting." Victor Rhodes. The name hit like a blow. Victor Rhodes had been his friend, his co-founder before the split. They'd built Harbor Light together until a brutal legal fight pushed Victor out with a golden parachute and a grudge. Asher hadn't heard from him since. That night, after the rain stopped, Asher sat at his desk scrolling through old emails. One caught his eye, an encrypted chain between Rhodes Consulting and a private storage company in Chelsea. The subject line read, "Asset Transfer AW Protocol." The initials made his pulse spike. He printed the file, grabbed his keys, and drove across the river. The warehouse was the kind of place no one looked twice at rows of locked units under flickering lights. The clerk at the desk recognized Asher's name and stiffened. "You need an access code, sir." Asher slid a business card across the counter, the kind that made people reconsider. "Then find me someone who does." Minutes later, a short man in a windbreaker appeared from the back. His eyes darted between Asher and the paperwork. "You're looking for Unit 317, he said. "Belonged to Victor Rhodes. You worked with him?" Asher asked. The man hesitated. He paid in cash. Said it was private storage, but... His voice dropped. "There was a file in there, a photo of a baby and a woman. I shouldn't have looked, but she had the same eyes as you." The gate code clicked open with a metallic snap. Inside the unit, Asher found dusty boxes labeled consulting invoices, client lists, and one smaller case marked AW Project. Inside it were folders, flash drives, and a sealed envelope with his name printed neatly in Rhodes's handwriting. He opened it slowly. "You always wanted the truth, Asher," it began. "Now you can have it. But the truth costs more than money." Attached was a printed hospital transfer sheet, showing that his sister's infant had survived the crash and had been listed as relocated for medical observation under Rhodes' consulting authorization. A false signature matched the hospital's chief administrator, one Asher had once promoted through his company's medical tech division. The pieces snapped into place. Rhodes had exploited Harbor Light's security access to erase the baby's identity, selling the data trail to cover debts from their failed venture. His sister had died chasing that truth, and Nora had been lost in the fallout. Asher's grip tightened around the paper. Rage came first. Then a cold determination that settled deep in his bones. He copied every document, left the originals untouched, and drove straight to Evelyn's apartment. She opened the door in her robe, startled to see him drenched and shaking. "He did it," Asher said, voice hoarse. "Rhodes. He covered up everything. My sister didn't just crash, she was silenced." Evelyn stared at him, her face pale. "You have proof," he nodded, handing her the folder. "Enough to bury him." The next morning he met with his legal counsel to prepare charges for fraud, obstruction, and child abduction. They needed a witness, someone who could tie Rhodes directly to the transfer. That witness came from an unexpected place, a retired security guard named Jonah Keene, the same man who had authorized Rhodes's entry into the hospital's restricted wing. When Asher found him living in a small apartment in Cambridge, Jonah broke down the moment he saw the documents. "He told me it was for emergency custody," the old man said. "Said the mother had died." "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Asher didn't want revenge, he wanted justice. He turned the files over to the state attorney's office. Within days, Rhodes was arrested at his vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, charged with conspiracy and kidnapping. The news hit the networks like wildfire. Cameras crowded outside Harbor Light's headquarters, headlines screaming, "Tech Empire Scandal Founder's Niece Found Alive." Asher shielded Nora from it all. He moved her and Evelyn into a townhouse near the harbor one, with walls covered in her drawings, and a kitchen that always smelled like grilled cheese. At night, Nora would sit at the window watching the lights flicker across the water. "You can see everything from up here," she'd say. "Even the moon." Asher would smile softly. "That's your compass now, kiddo. It doesn't lie, but peace never came easily." One evening, when Asher arrived home late, the doorman stopped him. "Sir, someone tried to get in earlier. Said he was with maintenance. Had the right gate code." Asher's stomach turned cold. "Did you let him in?" "No, sir," the man said. "He left when I asked for ID. Security footage showed a figure in a cap and dark jacket, Victor Rhodes's driver. He'd tried to enter the property before his arrest warrant had even been executed." Asher realized then that justice might not protect them fast enough. He doubled security, changed the codes, and refused interviews. That night, thunder rolled again over the city. Nora slept soundly in her new bed, her compass glinting faintly on the nightstand. Evelyn sat in the living room, knitting, eyes weary but steady. Asher stood by the window, hand pressed to the glass, watching the lightning cut across the harbor. Somewhere out there, the man who knew every gate code in his life, business, family secrets had finally been locked out. But even as the storm raged, Asher knew the real battle wasn't over. Truth had found its way in, and once the door was open, it could never be closed again. The courtroom was quiet, except for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and the steady tap of rain against the tall windows. Asher Whitman sat at the plaintiff's table. His hands folded, a file of evidence resting in front of him. Across the aisle, Victor Rhodes avoided his gaze, his once perfect posture broken. The trial had taken weeks, witnesses' testimonies, a mountain of digital records. Each piece had stripped away another layer of lies until the truth stood bare. The judge's voice carried through the room like a gavel before it even fell. "Mr. Rhodes, this court finds you guilty of fraud, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment." Gasps filled the room. The sentence, 30 years without parole. Asher didn't feel triumph, only relief, quiet and heavy. He turned slightly toward Evelyn Ruiz, who sat behind him with Nora on her lap. The little girl's fingers traced the edge of her compass chain as if it were a shield. When their eyes met, Asher smiled faintly, not with victory but with peace. Justice at last wasn't just a word, it was something real, something earned. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and bright. The reporters called out his name, but he walked past them without stopping. Evelyn carried Nora's backpack. Hank steadied her on the steps with his cane, and together they made their way to the car, waiting at the curb. For the first time in months, there was no need to look over their shoulders. The storm had finally passed. Weeks later, Asher stood on the balcony of his townhouse overlooking Boston Harbor. The late spring breeze carried the smell of salt and fresh rain. Inside, laughter echoed from the living room, Evelyn and Hank arguing over a board game, while Nora giggled uncontrollably. It was a sound Asher had never imagined he would miss until now. He turned, watching the light spill across the floor, and for a fleeting second he saw his sister's face in Nora's smile. Life didn't return to normal. It created a new one. Evelyn accepted a position managing the city's community outreach program. Hank, who had once slept under overpasses, was now a volunteer at the Veterans Center helping men who had walked his same lonely path. Nora started school in the fall, carrying her compass everywhere like a promise. Every morning she'd stop by Asher's office before leaving and say, "It points home today." He'd reply, "That's because you made one." Asher had turned part of his company into something new, something his sister would have recognized. Harbor Light now funded the North Star Fund, a program dedicated to supporting homeless children and families in transition. He insisted on no press release, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. He didn't need applause. The only thing that mattered was watching people who had been invisible finally find warmth and belonging. Still, the adjustment wasn't without its struggles. Nora, despite her joy, sometimes woke up in tears. She'd dream about the streets or the old grate on Boylston where she used to sleep. Evelyn would hold her whispering that she was safe, while Asher waited quietly in the doorway, feeling both powerless and grateful. Healing wasn't instant. It came in moments, a drawing on the fridge, a new laugh, a night without fear. One evening in early summer, Asher took Nora to Castle Island. The two of them sat on the sand as the sun melted into the water. She drew shapes in the wet sand with a stick while gulls drifted overhead. "Uncle Asher," she said softly, "why did my mom never come for me?" He hesitated. The question pierced deeper than she could understand. "She tried," he said finally, "but someone stopped her before she could. She loved you more than anything in the world." Nora looked down, pressing the compass into the sand until it left a perfect circle. "Do you think she can see us now?" she asked. "I think she never stopped," he replied. They sat quietly for a long time, the waves curling closer. Then Nora said something that made his throat tighten. "You found me," she whispered, "so now you don't have to look anymore." Asher put an arm around her shoulders. "You're right," he said, his voice breaking just enough for her to notice. "But I'm still going to keep an eye on you just in case." By August, their small family had settled into a rhythm. Dinner together, homework at the kitchen table, weekend visits to the Veterans Park. Asher's penthouse, once cold and empty, had become a gallery of Nora's drawings, photos of the four of them, and even a crooked clay compass she'd made in art class. On the mantel sat a framed picture of his sister, smiling in sunlight. Below it, a hand-drawn sign read in Nora's handwriting, "Family is who stays." When the media eventually uncovered the story of the North Star Fund donations poured in from across the country, letters came in too. People who had been adopted, reunited, found, or forgiven. Asher read each one at night after Nora went to bed, humbled by the simple truth they all shared: people heal people. One September afternoon, he was invited to speak at the courthouse that had once held his grief. He stood on the steps and looked out at the small crowd of reporters and families. "We live in a world where power often hides behind money and silence," he said. "But every child deserves to be seen. Every truth deserves a voice. I didn't find Nora because of wealth or luck. I found her because someone cared enough to look." The applause was soft but sincere. He looked at Evelyn Hank and Nora standing together on the edge of the crowd and realized they weren't just witnesses to his redemption, they were its architects. That night back at home, Nora placed her compass on the table beside a candle and said, "I don't need it anymore." Asher looked surprised. "Why not?" She smiled. "Because I know where home is now." He touched her shoulder gently. "Keep it anyway," he said, "just in case you ever lose your way again." She shook her head. "Then you'll find me." Asher looked around the room, the soft lamp glow, Evelyn humming in the kitchen, Hank reading the newspaper, and felt a quiet gratitude he couldn't have imagined years ago. His life had once been about controlling outcomes, predicting futures, fixing systems. Now it was about holding what couldn't be measured: laughter, trust, forgiveness. Outside, the harbor lights shimmered across the water. Nora pressed her face to the window, whispering, "Good night, Mom." The candle flickered beside the compass, its flame steady against the dark. Asher stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, and understood that this simple, fragile, beautiful life was the kind of family he'd been meant to build all along. Asher Whitman's journey began with a single act of compassion: a young billionaire stopping to help a frightened homeless girl in a dark Boston alley. What started as a moment of empathy soon unraveled a web of secrets buried beneath years of grief, deceit, and silence. Through courage and persistence, Asher discovered that the little girl, Nora, was more than a stranger in need. She was his lost niece, the daughter of the sister he had mourned but never truly lost. In seeking to protect her, he confronted betrayal within his own company, exposed the man responsible for destroying his family, and ultimately rebuilt something far more valuable than wealth connection. In the end, Asher's story wasn't about power or redemption through success, but through love that refused to look away. The man, who once measured his worth by stock charts, learned to measure it by laughter echoing through his home, by the drawings taped to the refrigerator, by the steady heartbeat of a child who now called him family. He proved that even the deepest wounds can heal when met with honesty and compassion. The lesson is simple, but profound. Real wealth is found in human connection. It's in the quiet decision to show up for someone when no one else will. In a world obsessed with achievement, Asher's story reminds us that kindness is not weakness, it's strength in its purest form. We all have the power to change someone's life, even with a small act that costs nothing but time and heart. So if this story touched you, take a moment to reflect on who in your world might need your compassion today. And if you believe in stories that remind us of the goodness still left in humanity, stories that inspire, heal, and move the heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating more powerful emotional stories that celebrate hope, courage, and the incredible impact of love.